Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. I am Stephanie Steffer, and I am the Business Director with CViConnect. Today, we are here to discuss the CVI range. And if this is your first time joining CViConnect for any of our live events, I just want to say thank you for coming and giving it a test to see if this is valuable information to you. This is a very laid back group that usually gets together. Some of you, I saw some familiar names registered again this week that have been with us before. Some of you are registered with the CViConnect subscription, whether it's the home edition or the professional edition. Those of you who have been here before, welcome back. I'm always glad to see some familiar names. I hope that I'm able to hit all of the information you were hoping to get from me today. And if for some reason we get through the end of the presentation and you were still wanting for more, I didn't really answer that question, stick around and we can either chat, you and I, or you can message me via email, whatever works best. So I would be happy to accommodate you in whatever way if I'm able to, or I will at least direct you in a resource to someone else who might be able to answer your question if I am not the best fit for that. Let's go ahead and get started. In order to figure out first and foremost who we're going to be using the CVI range with, we need to understand what is CVI. So we're going to kind of go back to the basics a little bit in today's presentation. Hopefully it's still meaningful to some of you who have understand CVI, you kind of have a good gist of it. We're not going to go into too much depth on it, but I just really want to make sure we're all on the same page and understanding who are the kids we're serving here and what information can we actually gather from this information? Why do we need to be using the CVI range prior to doing things and choosing activities and understanding those intervention strategies for students? The first and foremost, we're going to look at Dr. Roman has identified 3 elements in order to identify CVI. And the first is an eye exam that does not explain the individual's functional use of vision. And so for this, we definitely know that there are children who have CVI and have ocular conditions, but that ocular condition really doesn't make sense with what we're seeing behaviorally and visually from that student. Their functional level of vision just doesn't seem to match. We do have these eye conditions that are mostly associated with CVI. So we tend to see diagnosis like optic nerve atrophy, optic nerve hypoplasia, optic nerve dysplasia, and strabismus that may come along with a diagnosis of CVI as well. But that doesn't mean that everybody who has that diagnosis also has strabismus. So it's really important for us to understand these different diagnoses so that we can make sure that when we're communicating to IEP teams and to families that we are all on the same page and really understanding what's going on here with the child. The second element that Dr. Roman has identified is a history of a brain condition, trauma or damage associated with CVI. And so what this means is that there's a lot of wiring going on in our brain. I didn't put the picture in that I normally use that kind of demonstrates the visual pathways and how all that works and the information that flows. But that information is available on our YouTube page. So if that's something you want more in-depth information on, please check that out. You'll get that information there. And then I can also answer any questions individually if you have any. In general, these diagnoses are commonly associated with CVI. This, again, does not mean that just because you have these diagnoses that you also have CVI. We're looking for all 3 of these key elements to kind of fall into place, not just one of them. So a stroke isn't automatically going to mean CVI, but it should raise some red flags and ask questions if the team is seeing that their functional level of vision isn't really matching what the eye doctor is saying when they're looking at the ocular conditions of the eyes. Michigan's Department of Ed created their LIO CVI project team, created this little worksheet here, and I'd be happy to share that with anybody if you're interested. And it's just kind of a quick snapshot of the information that I just went over. And so it shows the visual diagnoses as well as some associated medical conditions that you might see with a child with CVI. So this tool has been used to share with school psychologists and other school professionals so they might be more aware of what to look for, especially like early on professionals, and I said school psychologists, so that we can kind of make sure we're communicating and ensure everyone is on the same page. And the last of the 3 elements that we're looking for are the presence of the certain visual and behavioral characteristics. Those are Dr. Roman's 10 visual and behavioral characteristics that we all have heard of before. And we can definitely go into those a little bit more in depth today as well. Of those 10, let's take a quick look at those. The first that we're going to look at is color preference. For children with CVI, they often early on in the phases of CVI, we have 3 phases, and we'll get into those and what those mean here in the end. But the 3 different phases of CVI, when you're looking at color, we often see in the beginning that a child may have a stemming color of red or yellow that tends to be more preferred. In the early on phases, that might be that's the only color that they can look at. So they can only look at items that maybe are red or maybe are yellow. It doesn't have to be reds and yellows. It just seems to be that those are the common colors that, and I cannot remember the brain study, but there is a study out there that shows that those colors stimulate the brain better than others. For some children, it could be blue, it could be green, it could be anything. Especially if it's a young child, you might see that it's something that stems from maybe the color of their stuffed animal that's in their crib, or that they really are attached to this one item in their life, and whatever color that is tends to become their preferred color. And so they're only then going to look at other visual targets of that one solid color in the beginning. But the good news is with CVI, we're going to see a progression of that functional vision. Unlike with ocular conditions, we're going to see that move forward, and we're going to see that functional vision improve. So as they move along the CVI range and into what we call phase 3, we're actually going to see that the student can now use color in a new way. And so they're still going to need color more so than their sighted peers. But in this way, they're going to use color as an anchor to draw their attention visually to what's important in the visual target they're looking at, whether that be in literacy or a 2D image that they're looking at, and we really want to drag their attention to something specific, and we're talking about the features of that item. We can use color importantly to highlight some different features and really bring their attention to it. Now, we do that on an average basis. When I'm presenting, Zoom has these features where I can draw on the slide and get your attention to something. So I could easily do the same thing by putting a red box around color preference. You know where I want your attention to go, right? And so that's really what color preference can become for a child who's further along the CVI range. It's just bringing your attention to where you want it. Similarly to how we do as adults, or you have the red pointer sometimes that people will use to get your attention. That's also a use of color and movement, which is the next one. The next characteristic is that need for movement. Children with CVI tend to have attention to things that have movement or movement-like properties. So you might notice things that are shiny or reflective. Those have those movement-like properties, will capture the attention of the brain and then be there more easily perceived by the child with CVI. The next item on our list here is visual latency, and that's the delayed response. It takes a longer time for the brain to process the visual information, and there are other things that could impact how long it's going to take. Not every child's latency is going to be the same amount of time, and you may need to show the item to the child for a long time without any other prompts to ensure that they are giving them the ample wait time that they need. For some kids, it might be only a few seconds, and for some others, it might be a few minutes. It's really important that we know the child that we're working with in order to know that we've waited long enough for them to actually see it. And everyone's looking behavior is also different. I hope you're seeing a trend that we're only on the third characteristic, and there's already so much variability from child to child in how we're looking at it. And that is why we're going through these characteristics and why we're talking about the CVI range, because it's really important that as more information is coming out and as we're understanding different things we can use with students, that we kind of dive back into the basics sometimes and understand the importance and the relevance for this data and how that impacts our decisions as educators to provide supports and services to the families and the students that we're working with. Okay, so visual field preference refers to the visual field that the child is looking at. We're used to that as teachers for the visually impaired, and Actually, one thing I did not have you guys do, which I normally do, is in the chat, drop in where you're from and what your position is. Are you a parent? Are you a TVI? Are you a PT, OT? I always love seeing who's joining me because that I can kind of monitor and change my conversation based on who's with us. So go ahead and drop that in as I talk about visual field preference if you have a chance. So as I was saying, visual field preference for a teacher for the visually impaired like myself, that's pretty common for us to understand that we need to figure out what their visual field is. But instead of looking for something like tunnel vision or maybe some spotted visual field loss, like we would for a kid with ocular loss, we're not looking at that. We're looking at where their preference is, because unless there's an ocular condition to prohibit the ability to use their visual field, the child has access to that whole visual field. It's what information is actually being able to be sent back to the brain and coded correctly so it makes sense to the child. And so in the beginning, we tend to see that they use their peripheral vision, so either on their right or their left, and then eventually they'll add both. So now they'll be looking at both their right and their left. And eventually they're going to merge that together and get that central vision. Typically, that lower field loss is one of the last to resolve. And so that's really important for us to keep in mind for orientation mobility purposes. If you're missing that bottom field, you're going to be missing drop-offs and things of that nature. I want to back up on the screen here. I have dorsal stream vision and ventral stream vision. And I love talking about this throughout all of CVI, really. But for this specific demo, it works really well to understand the two different streams of vision that we access on a day-to-day basis. Even as you're listening to me on your computer or phone or iPad or what have you, you are accessing your dorsal and ventral stream vision to gather different information around you. And I'm going to give you an example of how to do this. This was an example I learned from Chris Russell 2 years ago now, I think. I don't know. COVID's got me all confused on my timelines and years of when I saw people in presentations, because this was back when we were allowed to be in person still. But it really just was very enlightening to me. So I love sharing this as a demo for you guys. If you have a piece of paper lying around somewhere near you, pick that up, and without looking at it centrally, without looking directly at it, I just want you to put it up in your visual field. Maybe you already know what's on it because it's your grocery list, or it's a note you read from somebody, or maybe it's the note off your desk that you wrote earlier about something you need to do. But just for a moment, put that up in your visual field. So you've got that piece of paper in your visual field, and this is in my this is my right visual field for me. So whichever visual field you pick to assign, right or left. What I want you to know is that I can move it, and I know that there is something over there. Okay. Dorsal stream vision is your where vision. Right now, I am accessing my where vision. I know that there is a piece of paper to the right of me. Looking around the room that I'm in, I would also know it without even looking. If I saw somebody come in this room, I would notice that there is my desk and things on my desk to the left, but I don't really know what they are unless I turn to look at it, just like this piece of paper. I know that it is here, but I'm not going to know what's on it unless I make eye to object contact. And that's use of your ventral stream vision. So now go ahead and look at that piece of paper that you were just holding up, and that's making eye to object contact with it. Now you're accessing your ventral stream vision, and now you can tell me what is on that piece of paper. If you have the ability to sort through what's on there, and you have the ability to process the visual targets that are given to you on that piece of paper, you can actually figure out what that is. Okay. So with certain other information you would need as well, you would be able to access your what vision. But it's important for us to know this, because when we look at that span of kids who are in the beginning only accessing content through their dorsal stream vision, it wouldn't be appropriate for us to ask them questions that require eye to object contact, and therefore asking them what questions would not be appropriate for their vision. We're going to get into this even more as we continue. I hope that made sense for you. But it's just knowing that level, right? So you can't figure out what something is. I can't expect them to know what a word is, what a letter is, what the picture is, if they're only accessing dorsal stream vision. It's our job as educators, whether you're a parent, a TVI, a PT. I see we've got lots of different people here with us today from all over, which is awesome. Welcome, Pennsylvania. This is great. Regardless of your role, though, you're here with us today because you work with a kid with CVI. And so regardless of what your role is on that IEP team, we all have an obligation to make sure we're meeting that need, right? We need to make sure that we're asking the right questions and we're providing access in the right way. So we need to always be providing some visual stimuli and always accessing vision when it's appropriate. If it's not appropriate for us to use vision at that time, then we need to be using a different modality and look at either using tactile or auditory as a primary learning modality at that time. So I'll get off my soapbox and move along our presentation here. The next one is really the heart and soul of what CVI is, and that's the difficulty with visual complexity. If any of you have heard of CVI before, you have heard the relationship to complexity. In Dr. Roman's recent text that she just published, the second edition, which, by the way, I'm going to jump back a couple slides. This is the picture of her new text, the second edition. When you're looking at the CVI range, she has changed some of the scoring the wording of the scoring criteria and how you score. And so if you are using the CVI range and if you are completing that assessment tool, please use the information from the second edition, the information from the first edition. There's some still accurate information in there, but some of it has changed. And so it's much more preferred that you use the second edition so that you're using accurate content, as Dr. Roman has learned, and we all have, as CVI has become more and more prevalent in the field and people are taking the right steps to move towards where we really should have been a long time ago. We're finding more research and getting the information out there. So she's made some changes based on that research, and it's really important that you stay up to date with the tools that you're using. Back to complexity. So she's broken this into 4 different categories now. And the first subcategory of visual complexity is the complexity of an object. So when we're talking about that, we're talking about the actual target itself. And so we're looking at how many colors are on the target. In the early stages of CVI, like we said earlier, with color, you might have a child who can only tolerate that one preferred color at a time. And then as their functional vision continues to progress, you're going to start to be able to tolerate a non-preferred and even more patterns on the object. So for example, I had a student who early on was only able to view the Owlette doll there on the left, which was red. And sometimes even the face and the emblem on her chest was a little bit overwhelming. So she really preferred if we handed it to her with the back facing her, and that's how she kind of knew that was her favorite stuffed animal. So even all of the detail on the face became too much in the beginning, and then eventually that she was able to kind of work past that. But this object on the right, this Jack in the Box, would have been way too overwhelming for her with the patterns and the busyness that is going on there. It would have been too much for her to process at that time. The next one that we're going to look at is the complexity of the array. And I think this one gets overlooked sometimes because we get so busy in classrooms. And it's really important for us to constantly keep this in our forefront of our brain. When you're presenting materials to students, I think about the busyness of classrooms, and you need to think about what is beyond the visual target. And so in this next example, you have a classroom teacher who has a black, it looks like maybe a tablet or something that they're presenting on. And so maybe they even had a great image that was isolated on that tablet that they were showing. But when you look beyond that tablet, there's a lot going on back there, which makes that array very complex for the student. So it isn't about just always making sure that your desk space is neat and tidy. What about when the child is at circle time? Or what about when the child works in a group and is at centers? Or what about when the child goes to somebody else's classroom and is working with someone else for a little bit? What does the array look like for the child in that instance? What if you were to hold the target up in front of you? Now you have whatever pattern is on your shirt is going to become the complex background. So maybe you're wearing the school shirt for the day. It's, you got some crazy theme going on for the week. You've got Wacky Wednesday going on. So you've got some crazy outfit going on and you don't even think about it. You start holding up the visual target for the students to look at in the classroom, and it no longer becomes accessible to your student with CVI in this moment. So the other thing that we want to look at is, with the aspect of visual array, is that your brain is only going to be able to access the information that is important and deemed relevant. And so this is also going to tap into the complexity of the sensory environment, which we'll get to in a minute. But sticking with the array here for a second, in this classroom, you'll see that we have lots of resources hanging around the classroom, lots of colors, and they're placed there by well-meaning educators who are trying really hard to welcome and support all of their learners. And I've been there before. You want to make it welcoming, and you've got resources hanging up on the walls for the students, really making sure that everyone has what they need. But when we're doing this, we must consider how an environment like this is going to impact our learner with CVI. And what can we do about it so that we're still making the environment meaningful and welcoming to the children without CVI, but still accessible for our child with CVI? How can we meet in the middle there? Those are important conversations to have as an IEP team. So moving on, we're going to jump to faces, and then I'll get back into that sensory input that we talked about a minute ago. So complexity of the face is especially difficult for children with CVI, and children might not make eye contact even with their primary care provider. It's really important when you're working with a child with CVI that expectation is not put out there, that you don't say, you better look at me when I'm talking to you. I sound like my father when I say that. But that's not something that we can expect out of a child with CVI. That's not reasonable, especially if you want them to be listening to you. Processing both information at the same time is just not going to happen. But it's also important to know that the child may not be recognizing you based on your face. They might be using other cues in the environment, your voice, maybe the sound of your shoes, maybe it's a smell that you have, other cues to kind of hint them in and let them know who you are. And the same thing with their peers. And so that might really take a toll on their ability to make those friendships and interact with peers, because they're not always sure of who they're talking to, unless somebody else has a different cue available to them for them to access. Okay, so moving into complexity of the sensory environment. Children with CVI often have a difficult time if a toy or a visual target makes noise at the same time that they should be looking at it, because like I just said, the brain is only going to process the information that it can handle one at a time. So let's take a look at this picture here. You've got the visual stimulus here coming in through the eyes, and you've got an auditory stimulus here coming in through the ear. And so in the thalamus, it's going to sort out what information is needed and send that information and process it accordingly, okay? And so if you're getting visual and auditory, the brain is going to try to process which one is most important based on what you're doing, where you're at. What do I need to be safe? What do I need information to gather to answer someone's question? What information am I using right now? Where does my focus need to be? When that becomes overwhelming, which happens a lot in our life, probably more than we realize, the brain just starts trashing that information away. So anything that the brain deems as too much, as overwhelming, when something becomes too complex, our brains just start to trash that away and say, I don't need that information. So let me show you what I'm talking about.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Go!
So this was an ad to make people aware that they need to look out for cyclists. But I think it's also really important for us to take a note and say, it's really easy to miss something you're not looking for. Very easily. I know when I first watched it, I was shocked when they were like, did you see the moonwalking pair? I didn't at all. I'm sorry. Like I was so focused in on that white team passing the ball back and forth, and I wanted to be the one who was like, I know the answer. But my sensory information blacked out anything else that was happening in there and said that visual information isn't needed. I'm going to toss that out because it's not what I was looking for. And for that same reason, when we're assessing things for the CVI range, this is why we don't say, can you find the Cheerios? Can you find all of the ducks? Can you find all of the whatever it is? Because now you've told them what to look for. Instead, you need to ask the questions of, okay, I've set some stuff out here. Go ahead and, find what you can, or, just make it very vague. What can you find out in front of you? What do you see here? If they have the verbal ability to give you that information. But a lot of times I won't tell them what to look for or how many are there. If I am doing if you guys have seen during the assessment, Dr. Roman sometimes will set out like a fabric and different targets out on that visual target so that you've got the complexity of the array will change based on the fabric she has. So sometimes she'll use that plain black fabric to make that a nice simple array. And then sometimes she'll use different complex fabrics to increase that complexity and kind of see where the child is at. But regardless, when you put them all out, you've got them in all areas, all over the table. And then it's really important that you always say, like, can you find any more? Or is that all of them? Even after they've found every last one and they're gone, I would still ask again, can you find any more, or are they all gone, so that you're consistent? Okay. And then the other thing is that whether if they say, okay, that's it, they're not looking anymore, whatever that visual sign or that auditory or tactile sign that they're giving you, everyone's looking behavior is different. Everyone's communication ability is going to be different. So however they communicate to you that they are all done, you then clear out whatever you've got and don't tell them if there were still some there. That's fine. It's during an assessment, you're just going to move along and do the next one. But that's going to give you a lot of good information about their scanning ability for more information, what parts of their brain is just kind of like tossing that information aside, and how well they're able to handle that background. So just a few little side notes for you there. Moving along in our characteristics, the next one is the need for light. And kids with CVI may have an attraction to items that are lit or maybe have backlighting. And for this, we can also see that light can be used to bring attention to a visual target. So sometimes we'll use flashlights coming from behind the child to light up the target that they want. In my case, I use the iPad with CViConnect so that we're bringing that backlighting available to the student. The next one is distance. And this is really more about the child seeing something with more complexity of the array than it is about distance. And so if you take a look here at these different pictures, there are 3 images that have stop signs at varying distances away. And then the other is the 4th one on the bottom right-hand corner here is an image that is also a sign and has red on it. But if you look closely, it is not a stop sign, but easily could be mistaken for one at a distance for a child with CVI because of how much background is going on around the image. So you have that complexity of the array, which has increased as they get further and further away. So here you do have some trees behind it, but it's much closer up. It's much easier to see against that background. And for some kids, this might even still be too much, especially because it's 2-dimensional. So something to keep in mind. The next is our atypical visual reflexes. And so in this case, when we're doing our assessment, we're looking for the response from blink to touch and blink to threat. And this is the only characteristic that does not require an accommodation. So when you're looking at your scores after you've completed the assessment, it's just something that should kind of be your guiding note and let you know, but it's nothing that we have to address when we're looking at IEPs for service delivery. The next one down the list is difficulty with visual novelty. And for children with CVI, they often have a hard time processing new things. They may need a warm up or more processing time or an explanation using comparative language or salient features to describe what it is that they're looking at so they know the visual target and can begin to recognize it. Much different than their peers, where they get really excited about new things. Children with CVI often like things that are familiar to them instead. They tend to prefer those items. And the last one on our list here is visually guided reach. And so we tend to see students that may not be able to look and reach at the same time, but over time with accommodation, students should be supported to look first and then reach, always encouraging that vision precedes function. If necessary, sometimes we will physically prompt or support a child and to reach for the item that they need, but be careful because that might increase the complexity of the sensory environment for them. So it's not always just noise that's adding to that sensory environment. Sometimes it's smells, sometimes it's touch. It's really important to kind of look at that whole gamut. So knowing all of this, what is the role of schools? And so in general, when we're looking at the law of IDEA, if vision negatively impacts their ability to access education or their curriculum, this is really like narrowed down IDEA talk, but then we need to provide access through accommodations, provide direct instruction on those accommodation methods. If they, based on their present visual level, are having difficulty accessing the curriculum, it's our job in schools to make sure we're providing them with access. So through that, IDEA also says that for a visual impairment, we would need to provide a functional vision assessment and a learning media assessment. So those are the two required assessment tools. And every state is different, so you might have additional data that you need to provide, but this is the requirement through IDEA. So for that, you wouldn't want to typically use your ocular testing that you would use for your students who have ocular losses because the needs are completely different. We've had a lot of really nice assessments that have been coming out. Like I said, we've got a lot more research becoming more available. These are the tools that I tend to use. The functional vision assessment, I use the CVI Range by Dr. Roman Lancy. And for my learning media assessment, I now use the new sensory balance that just came out summer of 2020. That's like a little pamphlet booklet, and it's really great about like an additional tool to your learning media assessment. So that's not really a separate tool. It's just kind of looking at the data you're collecting in a different way because of the characteristics of CVI. That's really nice. And then there's some additional tests here that Matt Tejan has provided us with. What's the complexity framework, as well as the 2D image assessment, which I think both are two amazing tools that I use to kind of help piece together information about my students. Both of Matt's work and the sensory balance are on Perkins e-learning. They've got some webinars available to check those out if you're interested. When we're looking at the CVI range, which is what we're here for today, we need to look at, let me just say this, there are a lot of tools out there that could be used. I personally prefer to use the CVI range because it is validated and it's an effective functional vision assessment tool for individuals across age and abilities. And it has an educational focus to it and less of a medical focus to it. As an educator for myself, I am not allowed to diagnose. So this felt like the best tool for me. It's the one I'm most comfortable using. That doesn't mean you can't use other tools. It's just the one that I prefer and have the most experience using. If you're using other tools, might be able to help you out and answer some of your questions. I'm familiar with a lot of them. I still attend all the sessions and listen to it because I want to know and be aware of them. I just haven't made the switch to anything different at this time. I'm still using the CVI range, and I foresee me using this for a long time. Like I said, it is currently validated, and there is a replication study of the CVI range in process at this time. Dr. Roman is working with a doctor out in California, I believe, and I cannot remember his name, but so I'm excited to see how that comes out. When completing the CVI range, it's made up of 3 parts: the observation, the parent interview, and the direct assessment. When you're done gathering the information, Dr. Roman asks us not really to look at the forms while we are completing the observation, the direct assessment, and the interview. She wants you to hold off until after you've got that information and then go look at those forms. But when you're done, then you're going to take a look at those forms and you're going to score rating 1, which is considered the across characteristics. And so this is the overall score of rating 1 supplies information about the extent to which the impact of CVI is interfering with students' use of vision. And items with the pluses can go straight into the IEP or IFSP as your present levels of performance. With rating 2, this is your within characteristics. So you're going to look at each characteristic individually and score them as how severe, how much they are each impacting. So you're looking at the specific degree of each characteristic and how it's affecting the individual's functional vision. So any characteristic that is not resolved or scored as a 1 is recommended to become part of the accommodations and adaptations of the individual's IEP or IFSP. Also, when you're scoring that, the characteristics that tend to score a little bit higher can be thought of as the student's strengths, and the ones that are a little bit lower might be thought of as the student's areas of a little bit more weak. And so you can use that to help frame how you're going to use your accommodations necessary for your student. From both assessments, you're going to get a score of between a 0 or a 10. But because CVI is a lifelong condition of access, I would have extreme caution to even score above a 9 is really difficult. So if you're getting a child that high, definitely make sure you're assessing with another evaluator and having other input just to make sure we're not missing anything for that child. When you're done, you will report both scores. This is one of those changes that was made. At one time, we used to take the average of the 2 scores, and no longer do we do that. You need to report both scores from rating 1 and rating 2. So you should have those numbers available at the end, and that's actually your range of your child's vision. And then from that, you use those 2 scores to figure out the phase. And remember earlier I mentioned that we have different phases of CVI. And so a score of 0 to 3 would be in phase 1. And the goal of this phase is to build consistent visual behavior. And then if you have a score of over 3 but less than 7, you're going to be in phase 2. And the goal of this phase is to integrate vision with function. And then finally, phase 3 is a score above 7, but less than 10. And the goal here is to facilitate the refinement of the characteristics. Throughout my evaluation process, Dr. Roman always taught me to write down the characteristics on a piece of paper and then just jot my notes down throughout all 3 parts of my evaluation. And then I went to a conference and Chris Russell had this awesome observation note tool, which I think he is from the New York Deafblind Collaborative. And so I'm pretty sure if you search their site, this tool is available there, but I was not able to find the direct link. I had it downloaded from the conference that I went to. This just has each of the characteristics listed on the left and just a couple notes about those characteristics. For someone who might be newer to the evaluation process, it's great to just have those little hints available to you. And then on the right is an empty box where you could make your notes based on the evaluation. Now let's talk about using the CVI Range and CViConnect. It's as simple as these few steps here, and we're actually going to walk through them shortly. But before we do, I just want to highlight a few of the features that you'll see as we walk through the CViConnect PRO system. The first is that when you're using the CVI Range in the system, you have complete access to the CVI Range Forms online. You're going to have both rating 1 and rating 2 available to you. The next is that you're going to be able to save your results from assessment to assessment and graph that progress over time. And so this is really cool. You can, even if you were to start today, but you had, 3 evaluations from the past few years, you could actually put that information in here and show the growth you've made already and backdate it. And that's totally fine. But it's really nice to see. And a lot of times we tend to see this great growth through phase 1 and phase 2. And then we start to see this slowing down around a score of a 5 and a 6 and a 7, because you're starting to see so many other things that are implemented in the child's life and tend to have more impact on their vision. Then the next thing is the environmental description. I love having these environmental notes available. At the top of the form, you can put in here where you did your evaluation, where was each completed. Additionally, I don't have a screenshot of it. There's a little comment box. And so I like to put in my notes directly from, especially from my parent interview, from there. So that's where I tend to, after I write it down on hand when I'm meeting with the family, but then afterwards I like to go back in and type those notes in there so that I have their responses saved from the parent. The next thing is the scoring criteria. So if you are someone who is not as comfortable with whether something is a 0 or 0.25, or maybe if it's plus or a resolved throughout each of the rating, you can use our scoring criteria that Dr. Roman has given us permission to allow you guys. So you just click a little button that says show details. And with that, the scoring criteria pops up below each of the characteristics to show you what indicates that score. And then finally, we have comment boxes available for each and every element. And so as I go through it online, you'll see that you can add different information so that when you're looking back and trying to figure out your score or why you scored it that way, it's really nice from assessment to assessment to kind of collect all of that data in one place, or for another provider to go in and say, well, I'm not really sure why you gave them a score of 5 in color, and I want to take a look at that. You can look at the information that provider collected during their assessment. Let's go ahead and take a look. Let's go to CViConnect PRO. Sign in. All right, so here we have our dashboard when you first log in, and soon we will actually have our training modules linked here as well. Instead of having to go to our YouTube page independently, you'll have all of that available to you step by step and how to get in there with lots of these resources that we've recorded for you. But for here, this is where you get started. Then you're going to go to your student notebooks and you select student. And then here you'll have your list of the students that you are currently working with. Remember, for those of you who maybe don't know, CViConnect is completely HIPAA compliant. And so you're only going to view the students that are in your caseload and not anyone else's. But when you subscribe, you're paying per student. And so maybe my district has 25 students. Maybe if I'm working with Judy or Amy, they each have a few students on their caseload, but I'm not working with them, so I'm not able to view their files. I'm only looking at the students that I'm working with. Hopefully that makes sense. So I'm going to click on the student I want to work with. We'll work with our test student today. And then on the left-hand side from the student notebook, I'm going to click CVI Range. Here you can see I don't have one loaded yet, so I need to click the plus to add new. It's going to open up this form and I can select which provider has completed the assessment. So these are all the individuals that are on that child's team. I'm going to click here. I can also change my evaluation date. Maybe I completed this last week, and so I need to, or a couple weeks ago, I need to put that date in there. And then I can also indicate how old the student is. So we'll say this student is 5 years old and 2 months. So 5 years, 2 months. They just had a birthday a couple months ago. All right. And so I'm going to save that information. And then with that, I'm going to scroll down and now you'll see your rating 1 information, just like you're used to on your paper copy. And then I can click through. And if I click on this blue bar, it will expand open that specific section, right? And if I don't want to see this first section anymore, I want to minimize it, I can click it. And with that, it will just minimize and go away. Okay, so now I'm only looking at that range from 5 to 6. If I wanted to open all of them, I could just go ahead and open all of them. That show details button, remember I told you you guys could look at and make note of what are the scoring criteria based on Dr. Roman's latest 2nd edition text. Here are all of those scoring criteria available to you. So what does resolved look like? What does the plus look like? What does plus minus? What does the minus look like? And remember, you only have to use the observation, the O for observation, the I for interview, and the D for direct assessment when the information doesn't agree with one another. So if you're going to score it as, say, a plus here, that the child looks directly at the target and they have a pattern of 2 or 3 colors, that maybe you got this during the observation in the interview, but during direct assessment, it wasn't observed. And so you're going to mark off the 2 indicating why you scored it this way, and just leave the 1 blank that did not show that information. If you saw it across the board and it was consistent, then you don't need to continue marking those across your form. You can just continue to move down. Only mark it if it's a significant discrepancy there that you need to make note of. Further, there's that comment box, like I said, for each item it's available. So I could put in here, mom told me, blah, 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 and keep going in about whatever it was. So mom indicated that this is what she saw. And then I also saw it during the observation. And so I can make note of what it was that I saw during the observation. When I click on rating 2, it's the same thing. I can go in here and I can go through and score color as a 0.25 and movement as a 0.25 and score my range. But if I need to see those scoring criteria, I click show details, and all of the scoring criteria are available to me, as well as that comment box. This continues, even though it's really small, it's smaller because the show details box is clicked. So if I uncheck it, you'll see it grows, and I can continue to add in this box as long as I want. I don't have a significant limit on it. So you can see that even though while that text is kind of a smaller box there, you can continue to add there, and it's going to take the information you're putting in there. We also mentioned the comment box for the entire assessment, and this is where I like to put in my notes from my parent interview, but you can put any other information there that you find valuable as well. So that's your own comment section that's available to you. And then also we have the environment description. So when you did your direct assessment, what was it like? Where did you do your observation? What was that like? And get all of that information available to you. So you can see it's real fast. You just jump right in and you've got it, and then you can save it and look at that information over time. Here are the references of the different information I was able to share with you today. And this session, as I said, was being recorded, and I will have that posted to our YouTube channel, and we'll have the others available there as well. If you have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and type them in the chat now. I want to thank you all for coming and joining me today. I hope the information I shared made sense to you. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. Like I said, I'd be happy to answer them for you, whether it's about CVI or CVI Connect. And with that, have a good night. Ooh, mahalo, Amy. I love having someone from Hawaii. This is great. Thank you all for joining.